I'm Mary, and this is The Voice for Europe. Today in our program, we're going to talk about how to step into becoming a prophet or stepping into the prophetic ministry. And with us today is my friend, Prophet and Pastor Navin Sampson from the UK. He has a great ministry, international, where he goes and he prophesies and speaks into churches and builds the church in Europe and abroad. So thank you so much for being on the program today.
It's an absolute pleasure, Mary. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know that you have touched my life and many other people. I've really enjoyed being at different conferences that you have been leading and ministering at. And when you do speak the Word of God, I mean, it hits the mark. It hits the mark, and you are greatly used to build God's house. So today I really just want people to get to know you, get to know your ministry, and hear how you became who you are and kind of what you're doing. So let's go ahead and get started. When did you first kind of hear from God, and what kind of drew you specifically into the prophetic ministry?
Well, I got saved when I was 17. Previous to my salvation, God was communicating and attempting to get my attention. I was invited to a Morris Sorrello conference called Mission to London, and I went along to that conference, and Mike Evans was preaching at that time. And as he was preaching, there's many things that I could relate to and I could associate myself with. And I didn't know too much about heaven, I didn't know too much about hell, but I felt this great urge inside of me that I need Jesus. And when he gave the altar call for salvation, I went to the front and gave my life to Jesus, and I felt this burden just lift straight off me. And I felt this incredible sense of peace come inside of me and this great sense of relief. I remember I was staying at my cousin's house, went back to the house, and I got on my knees and I lifted my hands and began to worship. And Jesus, I saw Jesus, and it was like flames all around him, like the fire of God. And ever since, and I became addicted to God's presence.
Wow.
And, it's not as if so much I was disciplined to worship, I was disciplined to pray. It's that God supernaturally encountered me, and he graciously touched me by his presence, and I became addicted. And I wanted his presence. So whatever I would do, whatever I could do, just to find my way into his presence, just to spend time with me. And during just after I got born again, during that time, God met me in supernatural ways. I would lift my hands, and the presence of God would just manifest and come down. And he spoke certain significant things to me, which would be pillars to me for the rest of my life. Now, God would show me visions, and I was in a group of friends, and God showed me a vision of Sodom and Gomorrah, and judgment coming upon Sodom and Gomorrah, and then Lot fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah. And God said to me, you have to leave your friends. And that was one of the very first, aside from the vision of Jesus, that was one of the very first visions I received.
Really? So that's kind of like God was like pulling you out to separate you, which is very natural, to make you holy, because his presence is coming on you. He's setting you apart. He's pulling you out because you had a destiny.
God separates you from in order to separate you to.
Very good.
Yeah, God separates you. God took Moses, separated him from Egypt, separated him from that lifestyle, to separate him to God.
Okay, so I know that you obviously had to go to Bible college or something to kind of prepare yourself for your ministry. Like, you've been set apart, God's presence is coming on you, getting more familiar, you're drawing near. Kind of tell us about your preparatory time in the early days.
Now, the next stage of my training was to connect me to the gentleman who would be my spiritual father. And again, I went to Mission to London. And I met a man, and even to this day I would say he was a preacher. The greatest sermon I've ever heard, the greatest preaching I've ever heard. Literally this whole entire spiritual atmosphere ripped open, and the clarity in the spiritual atmosphere there was amazing, and the word was so powerful and strong, and even to this day I could probably recite the sermon to you. And there was such a connectivity to this man. There was such a connection in the spirit to this man. After the sermon, some of the preachers would stand by their book tables, and I went over to the book table. I bought numerous books, and because of the connection, God made a divine connection. It was like when Elijah met Elisha. You know, Elijah's mantle fell upon Elisha, and he touched that mantle, and he tasted that mantle, and he connected to Elijah, and that was that moment for me. And I had a great desire to pursue this man, and to pursue his ministry, to pursue this anointing, and to pursue this call. I mean, he was called as a prophet of the Lord, and he was an established prophet of the Lord to the nations as well. And I went over to his book table, began to buy his loads of his books, became a partner with his ministry as well. I met him as well. He also, without knowing me or anything, sent me a prophecy. And this was another way that God connected us. He also put me on his partnership plan as well, and I received numerous videos and some other things as well freely from the ministry. He also sent me a teaching about growing up spiritually and how to do that. And obviously God was touching on an area that, you know, this time of grace, this time of supernatural encounter with God was coming to me. It was going to lead me now to another season where I had to grow up myself.
Wow.
I had to make a choice to mature, and I had to make a choice to leave childish things behind and begin to use my will to willfully choose to do the word, willfully choose to forgive, willfully choose to resist temptations, willfully choose to put my flesh and soul under the leading of my spirit. So he sent me that teaching, and I began to learn about different moves of God through this man. I began to learn about different leaders of God who had been and gone in the past, and God began to speak to me through this. Now he had leaders here in the UK that ran the ministry for him in the United Kingdom, and I began to connect with them also, and they began to teach me some things that in some ways they took me under their wing, began to instruct me, began to teach me, began to help me in a very good way. They believed in me, and that's very important, that when you're raising someone and leading someone, that they feel that love, they feel that belief from that person.
Right.
And I felt that love. And God, now this gentleman, this prophet, had a ministry and had a Bible school in Southern California.
There we go. Okay, yeah.
He had this Bible school in Southern California, and I wanted to go because I wanted to be part of the ministry there. I wanted to receive from this man. I wanted to learn from this man. And I wanted the waters of the Spirit that he had to be poured forth into my life as well. You know, like I said, it was very much a Elijah and Elisha connection, and I really wanted to receive from my Elijah. And I began to ask God, I began to pray about it, and in the Bible it says, "Show yourself approved, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed." One day in prayer, as I was praying concerning going to the Bible school, these words came up to me physically. I saw these words before my eyes, and God was leading me to go to the Bible school. So I then made plans, and I went the next year. Now the Bible school was, they would say, it was a spiritual school with a educational upgirding and support.
Okay.
And it was there to train your spirit and to train your character. So while we were there, character is formed in the crucible of affliction. So as your character is, as you are made to, clean carpets, clean the toilets. I remember one occurrence. I was cleaning in the men's toilets, the urinals. I was cleaning the toilets there. The joy of the Lord was all over me.
Really?
I was so happy, and I was so pleased that I could be in the house of my spiritual father, and I could be serving, and I could be cleaning.
Well, weren't you upset that you weren't like prophesying or, having a microphone? Did that bother you?
For me, the privilege of being in that place, when I was much younger, I'd always wanted to go to the United States, so that was such a blessing that God allowed me to do that.
Right.
And then also, I was in such a beautiful place, and then, but more importantly, I was connected to my Elijah. I was connected to the man that God had ordained to be my spiritual father, and that to me meant the world.
Wow. Okay.
And so, for 1 year I was there. Now, I was studying, learning, doing all the Bible school things, and helping out in different ways. Every time I was encouraged that, look, any time that they have an opportunity to serve. Any opportunity there was to serve, I raised my hand, I wanted to serve.
Wow.
whether it was cleaning carpets, whether it was physically moving things, whether it was doing the gardening, whether it was whatever it was, cleaning the toilets, looking after different areas. I was on the usher team. I was helped out in the praise and worship team. I helped out with the youth. I helped out in different areas as well. And I went to this man. I said, look, God showed me that you're my spiritual father, and I want you to teach me. I wanted, that sort of personal touch. And he looked at me and said, no. And for the whole year, it was like he ignored me. And, this was also a test for me. And this was also to see where my heart was, and to would I serve, whether I had his attention or not, would I still serve God?
Wow.
And, continue to serve in that place, continue to serve the pastors, and, things were going well. And then the following year, before the following year started, he took me aside and took me out for a meal, and we began to sit down, and God, there was that connection there. And then from there, I was one of his armor bearers. He began to teach me, he began to train me. But still at the same time, I was working, in the Bible school, in the church there as well, doing various things. And, just like Philip the evangelist, he started off waiting tables. He started off cleaning tables, and then there came a time when God used him for other things. And then now after this time, I was a missionary in Indonesia. I did short-term missions before that in Mexico and in India, and I was just excited to be out there and that God was using me, and I could see people getting healed, I could see people getting delivered. Now I was a missionary in Indonesia for a much longer period, and God did amazing things there, but I also noticed that there were wrong things which were rising inside of my heart as well.
Wow.
And, preparation always comes before purpose.
That's good. That's good.
God prepares us by preparing us.
I agree.
The preparation for purpose is preparation.
So after you went through all this preparatory time, it sounds to me like you went through some really deep character building, and you passed the test. You did the right thing. You went on the pathway to your destiny.